Right, good afternoon everybody. Welcome along to this second session of the afternoon session. And for the next 30 minutes, we're going to be examining the implication of shifting trends in the balance between decarbonisation and climate resilience and the service provision from industry to deliver positive outcomes. Delighted to welcome to the stage speakers from AtkinsRealis to share their thoughts on this subject matter. Joining us are Richard Gutsell, Programme Director, Karen Hills, Technical Director, Mike Hunting, who is Complex Programme Director, and Stuart McLaren, who is Global Director as well. The session will be moderated by Jonathan Holyoak, who is Global Net Zero Programme Director. But before I hand over to Jonathan, just a reminder for your questions, if you use the Slido app, make sure you use the code #IZ24. Select Built Environment Forum as the room, otherwise your question will go over to the Finance Forum or somewhere else. So for the next 30 minutes, you're in the company of these fine people here. So I'm going to hand over to Jonathan now to moderate the session. Jonathan.
Thank you, Mark.
So thank you very much, and hello everybody. What we have planned for you today is probably about 20 minutes of conversation and hopefully 10 minutes of questions and interaction. So let me just second the thing about the QR code and getting your questions up, but also we'll have roving mics for you. I think this originally was a session where we were going to sort of showcase some of the work that we do, but we wanted instead to sort of really spotlight one particular issue, which is, we're seeing come up in the market everywhere, and our clients are engaging with it. And it's really about how do you balance the need to continue to decarbonise whilst also creating resilient solutions, adapting to the future climate as we see it coming, with limited capital budget. So that's the big challenge. I think that's what we see coming up everywhere. We're just going to explore this through a few lenses, through the lenses of clients, and we're sort of talking a bit about that, through some of the sort of commercial issues that we see, through some of the big sort of mega trends that we're seeing in the market, and also how we actually continue to stay focused on the real fundamental underlying challenge, which is about taking carbon out of the built environment. So that's your session today. As like I say, 20 minutes of conversation which I'll curate, and hopefully about 10 minutes of questions. And without further ado, I think we'll start with just a sort of bit of a feeling for what's going on in the market today. So I'm going to turn first of all to Stuart. Stuart was at Innovation Zero last year. And Stuart, how has the world changed since then?
Right, can everyone hear me okay? Brilliant. Well, I guess, just 12 months is a long time in the world of climate change, and I think we're seeing loads of great progress, but it's probably still not enough, I would say. So the market is really lumpy. Maturity of the topic as it's being felt in our key regions is still really, really shifting. And what you can see over the last 12 months, and to be honest, over the last few years, is all the ingredients exist, right? So most of the technological solutions that we're actually going to need to scale to address climate change, they probably exist already. I was in the financing conversation earlier. There's loads of money. There's a lot of will, a lot of desire, a lot of finance to really push this. But what we're not seeing is like policy stability. Still a lot of flip-flopping, particularly in some of our key regions in the US. We see some real instability. And we're not seeing the pace of people's plans, their transition plans, whatever it is, actually turning into on the ground work. And the unprecedented build rates that we actually need across key sectors just isn't happening. I'm also starting to see a left shift in the decarbonisation agenda in some of our key regions, with some of the big hard-to-abate sectors showing signals that actually 2050 just isn't achievable. So there's some real challenges around that. But what we're also seeing is an increasing uptick in some of our key regions in the shift to resilience. So net zero into resilience, particularly in the US, but we're seeing more and more of it from some of our core regions in the UK, Canada, and the US around how resilience and net zero are actually coming together. But what's interesting, when you look at the climate finance landscape, 95% of it is funding mitigation rather than adaptation or sort of resilience building. But adaptation and mitigation are two sides of the same coin. And I'm not yet seeing that really manifest in how we're innovating as an industry, as a sector, and how we're delivering holistic solutions, taking that systems approach to actually be able to provide multiple outcomes. And that, to me, remains a really big industrial challenge. And before I sort of just sign off with this initial segue, I think sort of the economic realities of mitigation are starting to sink in. And I've heard lots of people talking today about the challenge that that they're feeling around making the case for sort of deep decarbonisation of built environment, particularly in the existing assets, which will make up the majority of the things that will be operating and functioning in 2050. The case still doesn't stack up, and that's for a variety of reasons. And so I think in an increasingly unstable and polarised world that we are entering, having a systems approach, taking a more holistic approach to this is actually going to be pretty critical to being able to continue to make the case for why we should do these things. And again, seeing the innovation to support that is something I'd like to see more of.
Thanks, Stuart. I mean, one thing I should have said at the start is AtkinsRealis works across many jurisdictions with many different types of clients. I think, Richard, I'm going to turn to you next to talk about one particular type of client set that we have where I think they're really grappling with this challenge about how you do the business case and the holistic challenge.
Thanks, Jonathan. And I want to pick up on a couple of the points that Stuart laid. I lead on defence sustainability for AtkinsRealis, and that is one of the big hard-to-abate sectors. The net zero challenge there is huge, but we've got to set that against the immediate defence priorities. And as Stu said, the geopolitical situation at the moment is one of deep uncertainty, and the budgetary situation at the moment is one where there simply isn't a capital around in government to invest in these things. So we have to look at a broader business case, and resilience is very much a part of that. In the defence world, we're looking at resilience in terms of the ability to support our forces in delivering their defence mission, and how climate change and the increased extreme events will interrupt that. So how can we sustain those forces if some of your estate is underwater, if some of your estate and your operations are not deliverable because it's too hot? That business case is easier to carry forward than the pure net zero one, because the net zero one is strategic and we're looking at impacts in 2050. We are reframing that in terms of performance and delivery now. But we're also seeing an accelerator on this. So in the same way we look at the erosion of our defence effectiveness through climate change, we're looking at how we can accelerate that effectiveness, and that's through innovation. And I want to just use an analogy you could all understand. So if we look at a decision we'll all make in the near future, buying a car. So if you want to buy a car now, you've got a very real performance decision. Do you want an electric car or do you want a fossil fuel car? Break that down in the defence world and we'll look at capabilities. Now, there's obvious disadvantages. We've got our recharge time and our range. However, let's also look at speed of acceleration. So that's an electric car. Let's look at ease of use. Again, electric is overtaking the fossil fuel cars. Let's look at silent running, another very important characteristic. So immediately we see that in innovation, we're bringing forward different capabilities where sustainable propulsion systems, in this case, are bringing defence advantages. But that's today. In the defence world, we're looking in 10 years, 20 years, and sometimes 50 years' time, when, as Stu said, there is a significant amount of money channeled into those sustainable innovations. So if you want to outcompete your adversaries in 10, 20, 30 years' time, you need to be bringing forward those sustainable innovation technologies. So that's how we're looking at forming the business case to invest in net zero or a business case.
Super, thanks, Richard. I think there's quite an extreme but kind of insightful example of defence, isn't it? Resilience. There's some pretty hard metrics there you need to respond to, so that's helpful. Mike, let's have a little think about the foundations, and particularly, how do you create the right conditions for innovation in this space? And as we try and find this balance, there's a lot of uncertainty, there's a lot of challenge. Can you talk about best practice on the commercial front that will unlock some of these outcomes?
Yeah, it's a really good challenge, because actually not all of our markets, our sectors, our industries are like the defence industry, where we can look 20, 50 years ahead. And a lot of the foundations we have to work with is, whether it's from a client or consultant or an industrial partner perspective, is what's the business case now and who's going to get the benefits of that business case in what time frame. And that's a real challenge that we see across markets, like I say, because we're looking at 2 years, 3 years, maybe 5 years, sometimes 10 years, but it's always short term relative to the decarbonisation challenge. On top of that, we've then got the resilience challenge, and it's interesting because on the title of this we put decarbonisation and resilience, and the challenge at the moment is very much decarbonisation or resilience. The money that's going around, although there's lots of it sitting in banks out here, we know that it's actually really hard to get investment in the right things. Ask Dubai Airport, who have been looking at decarbonisation, suddenly they're looking at resilience to flooding. Where's that pot of money going to come from? They've probably got a bit more money flooding around than some others at the moment, but it's a challenge that we see elsewhere, more locally. Network Rail, landslides and impacts to their infrastructure due to climate change, that's taking money away from the money that can be spent on decarbonisation. So the innovation question becomes really important, actually, and how do we get that right for those business cases, for the pot of money available? We'll sometimes talk about the Goldilocks approach to innovation. Not too big. There's some great ideas out there. Elon Musk, brilliant ideas, sort of go and change the world, but not too small either. There's a lot of innovation that would just happens as business as usual and needs to continue. But in this space, if we're going to make the movement and the progress we need to get to net zero, then it's got to be the Goldilocks solution. It's got to be just right, and that means understanding across all the different partners in the sort of the industrial ecosystem with what the challenges are, and then how we can address them.
Brilliant, thank you, Mike. Not too hot, not too cold. Karen, can we sort of start thinking a bit more about what we need to do to tackle the decarbonisation aspect of the challenge, and perhaps also the role of standards in driving change in particular?
Certainly, yes. So a lot of the policy guidance and frameworks out there, like PAS 2080, sort of provide the framework and the drivers to encourage people to do things differently on projects. So, for example, if you look at PAS 2080, there's a strong imperative to think about doing things differently, breaking away from siloed working collaboratively, but also challenging the traditional way of the way we've always done things, and encouraging the whole supply chain to sort of think about different approaches and solutions. This sort of imperative is echoed across the industry, but one of the particular examples that came to mind was a study done by the IEA, the International Energy Association. They identified that in order to meet net zero 2050, half the necessary reductions of energy emissions needed to come from new technology. So that's technology that's still being developed, trialled, things like battery storage, low emissions hydrogen. It's probably worth noting, I think, though, that the innovation doesn't have to be big and shiny. Going back to Mike's sort of Goldilocks principle, it could be something like, how do we start to incorporate BIM and visualize carbon through our BIM models, so we can model carbon reduction in real time on the designs that we're working on. And then just one final thought, I think it's really important that we come together collaboratively with our clients, our colleagues, our partners, our competitors, and the supply chain to start talking about carbon as early as possible in the design process, so that we can start to embed some of those approaches and drive reduction. And then one final thought before I hand back. Innovation obviously has a really big role to play, but one of the things we've been noticing as we're rolling out some global carbon training is that behavioural and cultural changes are also really important to take into consideration. How do we get people to do things differently? So, for example, modal transportation shifts. So innovation on its own may not be the answer.
Okay, no, thank you, Karen. That's great. I did a session on a retrofit in the residential sector earlier, so behaviour change feels super important. But I think just one more question before I open up to the floor and just see if you've got any sort of responses to what we've set out so far. And it's to you, Stuart. I'm just keen to make it feel real for the audience, so perhaps sort of some more examples of kind of where you're trying to find this right balance, the holistic system that you talked about for clients, and to sort of things that need to get right in order to be effective in this space.
Yeah, so I think that we've got some great examples of where both decarbonisation and resilience have been at the centre of our clients' thinking. And actually this goes to the heart of, are our clients asking us the right questions? Are they focusing on the right projects? And that's into the cultural, behavioural, education We see that in organisations like the Environment Agency. So the Bridgewater tidal barrier is a great example of something we've been working on, which is there to stop tidal flooding of up to around 13,000 homes, but through 60 BIM, through like challenging design, like really standard design principles of how big stuff should be and how much concrete you should use. They've got the EA swap shop, where they've been able to drive around 50% carbon reduction in delivering an asset system to actually manage tidal flooding. So that is a client who's really had their sort of awareness as to how they can create a really nice balanced approach to ensuring they can deliver multiple outcomes. National Highways is also one where there's been some really excellent application of nature-based solutions on natural flood management, where they've been able to develop pretty large swathes of land on the flanks of large highways and trunk roads to use natural flood management to reduce surface flooding on roads. Now, the impact of that is actually significant. The amount of downtime, disruption, maintenance, that has an impact not only on the assets that National Highways are responsible for, but just on the general economic activity and prosperity of the system in which the county council through which those roads move through. Plus, you get biodiversity net gain, you get social amenity, you get cleaner air, and you also get decarbonisation if you apply the right type of thing. And so we do see a lot of our clients asking the right questions to be able to balance the two. But we also, using our Decarbonomics platform, where we're working in the built environment, looking at existing buildings. How do we decarbonise existing buildings at scale, given that 80% of the buildings that will exist in 2050 are already in operation today? How do we do that? And there's loads of great intention, amazing plans of people saying they want to decarbonise their hundreds or thousands or tens of thousands of buildings, whether you're an institutional investor or whether you're actually just an owner-operator. But what we've seen using Decarbonomics is a really interesting issue where interventions that are linked to energy efficiency will typically give you a return of investment on average of around 7 years, like give or take, okay? Whereas deep retrofit will give you a return of investment of nearly 30 years. And that is dramatic. That's a dramatic difference. So yeah, anything that is associated with actually saving money, stuff off the bottom line, brilliant. I can make the case, I can do things. Deep retrofit, to get to operational net zero in an existing building, as we're finding, as I said at the beginning, the economic realities that, oh my God, it's really difficult to make the case, is a big problem. And what's also interesting on the energy efficiency side of things, if you include air source heat pumps into it, given the current price of gas and fossil fuels, which are really low compared to a lot of the price of electricity, the average actually goes up to 22 years, because actually we're seeing instances where air source heat pumps aren't making their return over sort of 60 to 90 years, which is insane. Yeah. Because, and always case dependent, depends on the type of building and where you are. But there are some pretty material challenges in how our clients can not only deliver the decarbonisation, but actually creating that resilient environment, the resilient operations, and the outcomes of resilience. Resilient communities still remains a big issue for a lot of our clients.
Stu, thank you. It's amazing how quickly time flies. We've basically done the 20 minutes that we talked about. I think we could carry on talking for ages, but I'm really keen that we have a bit of an interactive session. I've got some questions on the Slido, but before I do that, does anyone in the audience want to sort of ask a question, sort of anyone grappling with these challenges, balancing adaptation and decarbonisation with a view? This mic somewhere. All right. While you're thinking about that, because I'll come back to you, here's the first question from the Slido, from the app. And I'll read it out and then we'll decide who's going to answer it. So, why is it that the planned pace of decarbonisation projects consistently falls short? Is it unforeseen issues arising? Planning too optimistic, or something else? So, pace. Why is it taking so long? Karen, why don't you ever get that first?
to me, there are two elements. There's the sort of the carrot and the stick. So I think the will of organisations varies. Some organisations, as we're seeing in our clients, like the Environment Agency and National Highways, are really committed to net zero. Obviously, they have strong links to government, so they're bound by the 2050 net zero legal target. But I think, there is a need for some of these stronger drivers to be cascaded down from that legislation to encourage people to move a little bit quicker.
Mike, I just wondered whether, perhaps from the Heathrow experience, you had a view.
Yeah, I think I heard someone in one of the other stages say earlier, just because we say it doesn't make it so. And it's really true in this. The aspiration's there, and this is the audience, this is the sort of events where we get people who want to make it so, but that's not the case in all the boardrooms across the country, across the world. And so without that stick, without policy requirements, without things being forced, then it's down to senior decision makers who want to make it happen, not just for making decisions to move ahead with programs and projects, which they do, which are there, but then the question was around why are we not getting to where we want to get to? And I think part of that is how we deploy our resource, our skills, our experience in this country. We don't put necessarily the best people on the most impactful programs or projects. And we see that not just in this space, but across everything we do in industry. So I think that carrot and stick analogy is great. I think we need policy to go faster, and we need a commitment from the boardrooms that actually we will prioritise this company by company, client by client, activity, project by project.
Yeah, so I completely agree with everything that's said, and I think the pace at which we can push out the net zero solutions and resilient solutions is also caught up just in the chronic productivity problem we have as a construction sector anyway. Like, so how quickly do we build anything in this country is a challenge. And when you actually look at where is that problem manifesting, is it in the pre-planning? Is it in the project development? Is it in the financing? Is it in the construction or commissioning? And actually, when you look at a lot of the really big energy systems, a lot of the issues emerge in the financing and the construction phase, which is where the pretty significant delays are happening. Add to that a lack of confidence in a lot of the solutions that are still nascent and untested and uncommercialized and not scaling because of a lack of policy stability and incentives and a guarantee of prices. If you think contract for difference for offshore wind and the policy frameworks that were put around that to incentivize that industry to scale. You take carbon capture and storage, for instance, there is no equivalent. There is no CFD for something like that. And potentially the confidence levels that then drive the finance signals, those types of things are missing. And then add into that this chronic issue with our ability to build things quickly and labour shortages. And actually earlier on the main stage, there were comments about, if you just want to get your tap fixed or your window replaced these days, good luck trying to find someone to turn up quickly to do that. So try and start doing loads and loads of mega projects at the scale and pace we need. There are some fundamental things missing in our economic engine to sort of allow us to do this. And these are pretty substantive issues that, private sector and industry we can help to address, but kind of has to be led from the government to create the right incentives. Where's the carrots and how big is the stick?
Yeah. So I think that takes us on quite nicely to a couple of questions that have come in. Thank you, by the way, for the questions. So there's a couple in the kind of how do you attract investment? One about, there's loads of money going into energy but less into the built environment, and one about whether a carbon tax would be, a good incentive. Richard, I suggest you might want to go slightly broader and just think about, what do you think, again, when you look at your client group, what are their challenges in terms of attracting investment and finance into the projects they want to get done?
There are many challenges in the defence space by its very nature compared to other industries and other sectors. So I'm going to dodge that and talk about the opportunities we have, if I may. So I'm picking up on a couple of the themes from other sessions here around finance. We have scale and we have land. So defence owns 2% of the UK land mass, and that's really critical when you start looking at renewables projects. we have that scale that we can bring as a demand, as a customer. So as a foundation customer for renewables or for different innovative finance mechanisms, defence can deliver you that certainty that and then enables you to go to market or achieve that funding. We're also low risk. Again, I heard from the Finance Forum and the Decarbonomics. So defence credit is very good. We will be here for a long time. Even though our capital isn't available at the moment, that is low risk. And if we can finance that through savings from our energy, from other sources, then we can look to the long term and achieving some surety in some of these interventions and mechanisms that we're going to need to make over 20, 25 years.
Can I just throw in on that one as well? I think kind of particularly the question with respect to the built environment and the incentivisation that we lack here. So carbon credits hasn't been talked about much as far as I've picked up over the last sort of 2 years or so. When we look at the built environment, we talk about the challenges of retrofitting. So if we brought in something like carbon credits, maybe tied to business rates, what are incentives that are going to get people to do that investment locally, not just to rely on the big moves, but actually all the way through society, whether that's from our big players, the big infrastructure owners, through down to landlords, smaller buildings owners across the built environment. How do we get the incentivisation right so that they prioritise decarbonisation, resilience type projects, how they get recognised for the benefits and the outcomes that those projects deliver, and then they're incentivised to pass that on to the supply chain who are going to innovate and bring forward the next set of projects.
Thanks both. Last chance for questions from the floor. I've got more questions on the screen, but I just want to give you an opportunity to ask anything in particular. Who's got a burning question? Hands up. Okay, so I'm going to give the panel some notice. I'm going to ask you all at the end for your one idea that you would like to see enacted to make progress, but to take innovation forward. So that's something for you to think about right at the end. But before then, question is on skills. Karen, I think I'm looking at you. Delivering innovation at scale may require reskilling workers. How do you take that into account in your projects?
Okay, so there's quite a few ways of answering that. So I think internally as an organisation, we invest quite heavily in upskilling our own staff. So we have an internal carbon academy that's aimed at developing those people with a particular aptitude and enthusiasm and interest in that area. But we also have sort of mandatory training that everybody needs to do. But also I think importantly is we're always keen to take that to our clients and partners and share sort of upskilling and training with them, because ultimately we want to be in a position where everybody does carbon.
Super, thank you. So we're almost out of time. I'm just going to pass the floor back, starting with Richard, for his one bright idea, the most important thing that he thinks we need to get going on to make progress on this agenda. So Richard, over to you first.
So I'd like to call that industrial strategy. So I think the defence can bring real scale. I've said to this. Now, if we have an industrial strategy and procurement policy following that can prioritise British buying, and we can bring the scale of purchase to that to bring those industries through, to allow them to scale to reach critical mass through our customer base. And that we've seen in other sectors like wind will then bring the global potential. So the flow through of defence buying British then creates the innovation that delivers a global market.
Thank you, Richard. Industrial strategy. Stuart.
Well, I'll be honest, like the boring answer is we just need to sort the policy stability and have really ambitious incentives in place from the top. Beyond that, I would say just building on the ever-growing collaboration with the finance community, increasing the community of insurance, so the insurers, the finance community, working with industry, particularly with our clients, so that our clients can start to see how they can make their project look attractive to the finance and insurance community. You have technical folk like us. We'll see a good project when we see one. but often that's not perceived through the lens of how a financier would see a good project. So getting that education so that we can all be singing from the same song sheet, so we could get scale, because a lot of the projects we see are subscale, particularly local authorities, subscale in investability. So I think building on that cross-sector collaboration is probably the best thing we can do to really operationalise the intent.
Okay, so the policy, collaboration and finding the good projects. Karen?
So my response starts boring but gets interesting. So I think incorporating carbon commitments into procurement and contract documents. So you're almost being given permission by a client to spend time and money looking at carbon, and once you've got that, you've got the space to innovate essentially and start to explore some of those more exciting solutions that are going to make a difference.
Over to you, Mike.
I guess mine kind of wraps up some of those. I think for me, having the right framework for collaboration on solutions is really important. How do we get the right expertise into the front end of projects so that the right solutions can be developed, incentivised, risk apportioned appropriately? And that's the whole framework, from the financing and the risk, the insurers, all the way through to the SMEs who've got real niche expertise that can be brought forward that actually lots of project owners, clients don't have access to without a good collaboration framework to bring them forward.
Yeah, okay. That's a great note to end on. Thank you. And thanks to our panel, and thank you all to the audience. So thanks, everyone.
Thank you.